The air in the grand foyer of the Abbott mansion always carried a certain weight, a mixture of old money, older secrets, and the faint floral scent of the arrangements changed daily by the staff. It was here, under the glittering chandelier that cast dancing prisms of light across the polished marble, that the carefully constructed world of one man began to fissure. The day had begun like any other, a tapestry of corporate machinations and personal grievances woven with the familiar threads of Genoa city life. Phyllis Summers, a woman whose very existence was a testament to chaos barely contained by designer clothing, had been buzzing with a peculiar energy all morning. It was a specific kind of fervor, one that those who knew her, truly knew her, recognized as the prelude to an explosion. She had a piece of information, a gem of truth or a masterful fabrication, and she was waiting for the perfect moment to place it like a bomb at the foundations of someone's life. Her target, seemingly, was the ever-confident, perpetually smug Billy Abbott, but those with a keener eye might have noticed her gaze flickering, again and again, towards a man who presented himself as an island of calm in the city's constant storm, Matt Miller. He was a figure who had arrived with a quiet confidence, his past a carefully curated mystery that he deflected with charm and a disarming smile. He was a listener, an observer, a man who seemed to understand the rhythms of Genoa City without ever revealing his own. To Phyllis, this made him either a fascinating puzzle or a direct threat. She had never quite decided which, but her instincts, those primal, often dangerous instincts that had both saved and ruined her life on numerous occasions, were screaming that there was more to Matt Miller than met the eye. She had been digging, not out of any particular malice towards him at first, but as a side project, a hobby to fill the hours when scheming for Jabot or battling with Christine Blair grew tedious. The trail had been cold, expertly wiped, but Phyllis possessed a terrier's tenacity when it came to unearthing secrets. It was a stray financial record, a digital ghost from a bank in Manila, linked to an alias she'd only found referenced in a forgotten, encrypted email from a rival she'd paid handsomely. The name meant nothing to her at first, just another piece of useless data. But then she saw it, a connection so absurd, so operatic in its implications, that she initially dismissed it as a fantasy. The alias was a thread, and when she pulled it, the entire tapestry of Matt Miller began to unravel, revealing a face she had never expected to see again. The confrontation with Billy was reaching its crescendo, voices raised, accusations flying like shrapnel. Phyllis, with the theatrical timing of a born provocateur, was about to deliver her final, crushing blow to his ego, a revelation about his personal finances she knew would cripple him. But as she drew breath, her eyes locked with Matt's from across the room. He was watching her not with anger or anxiety, but with a placid, almost pitying calm that ignited a fury within her. It was that calm, that utter assurance of his own safety, that made her change her target in an instant. The words meant for Billy died on her lips. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face, a smile that promised imminent ruin. "You know, Billy," she said, her voice dropping from a shout to a venomous purr. "You think you're so clever, playing your little games. But you're an amateur. We have a real professional in our midst." She turned her body fully, a queen redirecting her court's attention, and pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at Matt. "A man who is so skilled at playing a part that he's even convinced himself. Isn't that right, Rey?" The name hung in the air, a solitary, dissonant note. For a second it seemed nonsensical. Rey? Who was Rey? Confused glances were exchanged. But the effect on Matt was instantaneous and catastrophic. The color drained from his face, not in a slow flush, but in a sudden sickening wash. His carefully maintained posture, the relaxed set of his shoulders, collapsed inward as if he'd been physically struck. The glass of whiskey in his hand, which he had been swirling with an air of detached amusement, trembled, sending amber droplets spotting onto his pristine trousers. He didn't speak. He couldn't. His eyes, wide with a terror so raw and profound it was almost uncomfortable to witness, were fixed on Phyllis, seeing not the woman before him but the specter of a past he had believed buried forever. That single one-syllable name, Rey, was a key turning in a lock he had welded shut, and the door was now bursting open, unleashing a flood of memories, regrets, and identities he had worked for years to escape. The silence in the room was no longer merely awkward. It was thick, heavy, charged with the electricity of a reality being fundamentally altered. He was no longer just Matt Miller. In the space of a heartbeat, he had become a ghost, a echo, a man living on borrowed time whose debt had just been called in. And for those who had known and loved Rey Rosales, the name was a thunderclap. Sharon, who had found in Rey a steadfast rock after years of emotional turmoil, felt the floor lurch beneath her feet. Rey Rosales was her late husband. Rey Rosales was dead. She had mourned him, wept over his grave, and painstakingly rebuilt her life from the ashes of that loss. To hear his name now, in this context, attached to this man, it was an abomination, a cruel joke that made no sense. Her mind recoiled, refusing to connect the two concepts. Matt was a friend, a confidant, a presence in her life who had been there with a kind word, a supportive gesture. He couldn't be Rey. It was impossible. The man she loved had died a hero, his life cut short in a tragic accident. Yet, as she stared at Matt's ashen face, at the unadulterated guilt and panic in his eyes, the impossible began to take on a horrifying shape. The familiar curve of his jaw, the specific shade of his eyes in a certain light, the way he sometimes would pause as if to say something and then think better of it, all these tiny insignificant details now assembled themselves into a damning new portrait. The grief she had worked so hard to process curdled in her stomach, transforming into a nauseating brew of betrayal and confusion. How could he? Why would he? The questions screamed in her mind, but no answers came, only the chilling certainty that Phyllis was telling the truth. The explanation, when it finally stumbled from Matt's raised lips, was a halting, fractured confession pulled from a place of deep shame and desperation. It wasn't a single coherent narrative, but pieces of one, offered in the days that followed as he was besieged by the people he had deceived. He spoke of the accident, the one that had officially claimed Rey Rosales' life. He described the overwhelming pressure, the constant danger that came with his work as a police detective, the threats that had begun to spill over onto his family, onto Sharon. He had seen a way out, a tragic but clean exit, a John Doe, a mangled car, a case closed with a sympathetic sigh. He had fabricated his own death to protect them, he insisted, his voice cracking with the emotion that felt terrifyingly real. He had watched his own funeral from a distance, a ghost in his own life, his heart shattering as he saw Sharon's profound grief. He had intended to disappear forever, to let her heal and move on, but the pull of her, the pull of Genoa City, had been a gravitational force he couldn't resist. So he had crafted a new identity, Matt Miller, a man with a benign, unremarkable past, and he had slipped back into the periphery of her world, just to be near her, to ensure she was safe, to bask in the glow of her presence, even if he could never again hold her. It was a story of twisted, tragic love, a sacrifice warped into a monstrous deception. He claimed he had planned to never reveal himself, to let Rey remain a cherished memory, but being near her had been an addiction he couldn't break. The lie, however, had taken on a life of its own, growing and mutating until the man known as Matt Miller had almost completely consumed the ghost of Rey Rosales. The fallout was a shockwave that radiated outwards, touching and tainting every life it had intersected with. For Sharon, the psychological damage was immeasurable. The foundation of her recent past had been revealed to be quicksand. Every moment of comfort she had taken from Matt's friendship, every shared laugh, every quiet conversation, was now recontextualized as a calculated manipulation. Her genuine grief for Rey had been shared with the very man she was mourning, a fact so perverse it felt like a violation of her very soul. The love she had for Rey, pure and sanctified by death, was now tangled with the betrayal of Matt. Were they the same man? Could she separate the hero she lost from the liar who had returned? Her mind became a prison of conflicting emotions, a residual love for the husband she buried, a burning hatred for the impostor who had watched her cry, and a terrifying, unwelcome flicker of recognition for the man who had, in his own broken way, done it all to be near her. It was a trauma that dwarfed all others, a betrayal so fundamental it called into question her own judgment, her own ability to perceive reality. How could she not have known? The question would haunt her for years, a constant, nagging doubt in every future relationship, every moment of trust. For the other residents of Genoa City, the revelation was a lesson in profound distrust. If a man could fake his own death and return as another person, who else was not who they seemed? Alliances were questioned, past interactions were scrutinized for hidden meanings, and a pervasive paranoia settled over the city's social fabric. Phyllis, of course, reveled in the chaos she had unleashed, positioning herself as the clear-eyed truth-teller, though her motives were as murky as ever. She had not acted out of a desire for justice, but for the sheer, addictive power of knowing and exposing a secret of this magnitude. Billy Abbott momentarily spared Phyllis's wrath, watched the drama unfold with a mixture of schadenfreude and a chilling realization of just how dangerous Phyllis could be. The Newman and Abbott families, usually the epicenters of scandal, found themselves on the periphery of this deeply personal cataclysm, but even they were not immune to its implications. It was a reminder that the most explosive secrets were not always about corporate takeovers or paternity tests, but about the very essence of identity. In the end, Matt, or Rey, was left utterly alone, his carefully constructed life in ruins around him. The man who had returned from the dead to secretly watch over the woman he loved was now exposed as a specter at the feast, a living reminder of a deception too great to forgive. He had gambled everything for a chance to be near a ghost of his own past, and he had lost. There would be no tearful reunion, no understanding embrace from Sharon. There was only the crushing weight of his actions and the hollow reality of his existence. He was a man without a country, without a name, trapped between two identities, both of which were now corpses. He had killed Rey Rosales once, and in exposing him, Phyllis had killed Matt Miller. He was left with nothing but the echoing silence of his own choices, a man truly and utterly lost. The secret was out, the shock had been administered, but the healing for everyone involved would be a long and complicated journey, if it ever came at all. The phantom of Rey Rosales would now walk the streets of Genoa City not as a comforting memory, but as a scar, a permanent testament to the fact that in a town built on secrets, the most dangerous one of all is the face a person chooses to wear. Phyllis Summers had always trusted her instincts, especially when something felt off. Over the years she had sharpened those instincts into one of her most dangerous weapons, and when they started tingling it was usually because someone in Genoa City was playing a game they shouldn't be. She had been watching Matt for weeks, this charming, composed newcomer who seemed to slide effortlessly into everyone's good graces. His presence had unsettled her almost immediately, though she couldn't explain why. It wasn't suspicion at first. It was familiarity. There was something about his eyes, the way he spoke, the way he scanned a room like he could read every secret hidden inside it. She had brushed it off initially, blaming her hypervigilance. But it became impossible to ignore when she caught him at Crimson Lights staring at Sharon with an expression that was far too intense for a man who supposedly barely knew her. She had lingered nearby, pretending to check her phone while watching the tension in his jaw. The way he followed Sharon's movements with an odd mixture of regret and longing. Emotions he tried to mask the moment he realized Phyllis was looking. That moment sparked a new fire inside her. She didn't trust him, not even a little. And she especially didn't trust any man who looked at Sharon like he knew her better than he should. Genoa City had been through too many mass threats. Ashlyn Locke, Cameron Kirsten, Stitch's breakdown. So a man with a strange edge was more than enough to put her back into investigative mode. She started to dig, quietly at first, tracing his background through harmless questions asked to the right people, but everything she found only raised more alarms. Nobody seemed to know much about him. He drifted in with a story about a fresh start and opportunities in town, but the details were vague, rehearsed, and inconsistent. When she looked deeper, his past was practically non-existent, like it had been erased on purpose. Matt's driver's license, business papers, and rental agreement all appeared legitimate, but too legitimate, clean in a way that felt manufactured. Phyllis had seen falsified documents before, and these shared the same sterile precision. The deeper she dug, the more convinced she became that he was hiding a massive secret. Her first thought was that he might be another villain posing under a new identity, but there was something else haunting her gut. Something she couldn't place until she began noticing the specific ways he interacted not just with Sharon, but with the Rosales family. The breakthrough happened accidentally when she overheard Lola talking to Abby at Society, mentioning how she felt unsettled by Matt. She couldn't explain it, but something about him reminded her of Rey. Not in appearance, not directly, but in energy. She said Matt held himself with the same kind of quiet control, that same protective vigilance Rey had always embodied. Phyllis froze when she heard that. Her mind connected the dots faster than she wanted it to. She knew Lola wasn't mistaken. If anyone could sense Rey in someone, it would be his sister. And suddenly the familiarity snapped into place. Matt wasn't just similar to Rey Rosales. He was Rey, alive, hidden, deceiving everyone, including the woman he had once loved. The idea seemed impossible at first. Rey Rosales had died suddenly in a car crash, or so everyone had been told. Sharon had mourned him deeply, her grief unfolding in layers over months. The police reports, the official statements, the funeral, it had all been laid out clearly. But Phyllis knew better than to blindly trust official stories. She had seen too many cases of corruption and cover-ups, especially involving dangerous criminals or witnesses in protection. Still, the enormity of her suspicion required proof before she could accuse anyone of such deception. Phyllis began watching him more closely. She noticed the way Matt always positioned himself near exits, a habit Rey had developed during his years as a detective. She noticed the way his hand subtly reached toward his waist when startled, like he was instinctively checking for a weapon that wasn't there. When she dropped a sarcastic dig to see how he responded, he gave her that same weary half-smile Rey had always used when he knew she was pushing buttons just to get a reaction. Finally convinced her instincts were right, she dug deeper, this time using connections she rarely ever called on. After a multi-day scramble through shadowy channels, she received confirmation that the name Matt Ramirez had been created only 18 months prior. It coincided suspiciously with the exact period immediately following Rey's supposed death. The documents were too perfect, too recent, too curated. She knew she had him. The truth nearly made her dizzy. Rey alive. Rey hiding. Rey letting Sharon grieve him while he walked around Genoa City under a false identity. She had so many questions she didn't know which one to scream first. She didn't understand why he would do something like this, or who would have the authority to force him into it. But she knew Rey had been working a dangerous undercover case before his death. It was possible that the case had spiraled into something enormous enough to justify faking his demise. Whether he had done it willingly or been coerced by the FBI or witness protection didn't matter yet. What mattered was that Sharon deserved the truth. And if Sharon's heart was going to shatter from this revelation, then Phyllis would be damned if she let anyone accuse her of not doing the right thing, for once. She confronted him late at night outside of Crimson Lights. He had been locking the door, preparing to leave when she stepped out of the shadows. Her stare sliced through him so sharply that he visibly tensed. She didn't bother with pleasantries. She told him outright she knew who he was. The air thickened instantly, and she watched his face shift through a storm of reactions. Shock, fear, anger, resignation. Then in the softest, most painful whisper, he said her name the way only Rey ever had, with tempered patience and a hint of hesitation, as if already preparing for the worst. It was enough. She had her confirmation. He begged her not to reveal the truth yet, saying lives depended on it. His undercover mission had been far bigger than anyone realized, and he claimed he was still in danger. He told her that if the wrong people found out he was alive, they would go after Sharon, Lola, and even Nick. The threats he described were vast, international, and ruthless. But Phyllis wasn't moved, not this time. She told him she would not let Sharon continue living a lie. She understood the danger, but she also understood pain, and Sharon had lived in agonizing grief for far too long. No mission, no criminal network, no undercover operation justified that level of torment. Phyllis stormed away, fueled by righteous fury. She knew Rey's excuses, even if genuine, were not enough to justify the cruel silence he had forced onto everyone who cared about him. The weight of the revelation bore down heavily on her. She needed to tell Sharon immediately, but she also knew the fallout would be catastrophic. Sharon had been through emotional hell, from losing Rey to Cameron's horrifying return. Learning that Rey had been alive the entire time could break her in ways no one might be able to fix. But Phyllis refused to be the keeper of such a destructive secret. When she reached the cottage, Sharon opened the door with her warm, familiar gentleness, not knowing this moment would shatter her world. Phyllis struggled with how to begin, but as soon as Sharon offered her tea and asked if everything was okay, her resolve snapped. Words poured out in a rush about Matt, about the investigation, about Rey's fake identity. Sharon froze completely, her face black and white with shock. At first she denied it, her mind refusing to accept what she was hearing. But the more Phyllis explained, the more Sharon's eyes filled with tears and dawning horror. The mug slipped from Sharon's hands, shattering on the floor. She barely reacted. Her voice cracked as she whispered Rey's name for the first time in months, this time not with grief, but with trembling disbelief. Phyllis tried to calm her, but Sharon backed away, shaking her head repeatedly, insisting it couldn't be true. Then anger took over. Betrayal surged through her like a tidal wave. She wanted to see him. She needed to confront him. And nothing Phyllis said could slow her down. She found Matt Rey at the park, trying to stay hidden as he awaited her reaction. The moment she shouted his name, he turned, and the look on his face confirmed the truth she had feared the most. He hadn't been planning to tell her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Sharon's heartbreak erupted. She demanded to know how he could justify letting her mourn him. He explained everything he could, the threats, the forced secrecy, the operation that required a new identity. But no explanation could touch the depth of what she felt. She had grieved a man who had been alive all along. She had rebuilt her heart on a foundation of lies. When she collapsed in sobs, Rey instinctively reached for her, but she recoiled as if his touch burned. She told him that even if he believed he was protecting her, he had destroyed something far more fragile than his own safety. Her trust, her peace, her ability to believe in anything again. Phyllis quietly observed from a distance, tears in her eyes from the intensity of the moment. She had wanted to expose a secret, not destroy two lives. But now the truth was out, and there was no turning back. Rey's mission, his new identity, his silent suffering, none of it mattered compared to the betrayal Sharon felt. And as Phyllis watched Sharon walk away from him, devastated beyond words, she realized that she had triggered the most explosive emotional reckoning Genoa City had seen in years. More fallout would come. Nick would be furious. Lola would be overwhelmed.